For more on the G20 summit, let's go to New York, where we are joined by Richard Wolff. He's professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a visiting professor at the New School in New York City. Always a delight to have you on the broadcast. What can we expect from the G20 summit? With the tensions over Syria either still lingering or perhaps dominating the headlines, can we expect much of all?
Well, frankly, I don't think so. I think mostly this is an occasion for photo ops and posturing. Most of the leaders are speaking to their own countries' citizens through the media, and they don't do much about the global economy, and they don't really have much power over it anyway. Or to put it differently, they have some power, but they seem afraid in general to use it. So I don't expect very much, and I don't think the markets or anybody watching this is much taken with it.
Now, the theme of the G20 is to spur new growth. Where would you say it's needed, and what can be done by the ministers to actually help to spur growth?
Well, what they could do, if they were of a mind to do it, is to give a kind of real stimulus to the economies that they represent where they need it. With the last few months of restored production, the big obvious drag for the future is the fact that unemployment remains at depression levels in half of Europe, and here in the United States it's still a serious problem. So what you ought to have is a concerted effort to put people back to work. And since the private sector is clearly unable or unwilling to do it, that would mean a governmental employment program, and that's not even on their agenda, which is one of the reasons why not much is expected.
Are there other areas that we should be focusing on when it comes to the world economy?
Absolutely. I think you have a generation now of people who are frightened about the broad changes in the economy. The shift of jobs from North America, Europe, and Japan to other parts of the world and what that means. The arrival in those parts of the world of the instability, the ups and downs of our typical economic system that we live with. These are creating enormous challenges. You mentioned earlier, or the preceding program did, improvements in the Eurozone, but those have to be balanced against serious downturns in India, China, Brazil, and so on. All of this has to be managed, and theoretically the G20, starting back in 1999, were supposed to coordinate and manage. They hadn't done a very good job. They did very little to prevent the meltdown of 2007, and that we're still in, and they haven't shortened it or made it less severe, which is again a sign that whatever the powers they have in theory, they're either unable or unwilling to use them.
Now, Richard, you mentioned the Eurozone, and as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing some recovery there, especially the UK. But this has been a few good months. Is this actually a recovery, or is it a longer-term trend, do you believe, or what are you seeing there?
I think what you're seeing is a certain bouncing. In all long-term downturns that we have history of, going back even before the Great Depression of the 1930s, it's never a straight line. You don't go straight down, hit bottom, and go straight up. You bounce around. I think what we're seeing now is a bounce up from the severe lows that we have mostly been in for the last 5 years. It is way too early to see whether any of this can be sustained. And once again, because of the downturns in India, China, Brazil, and so on, even the very fragile uptick in the Eurozone is something that would have to continue and accelerate before any serious talk of recovery that isn't just political hype would make sense.
Now, Richard, a few years ago, there was this thoughtful paper circulating around that the G20 is illegitimate, ineffective, it's multilateralism of the big. And if not much comes out of this summit, and that's what you're alluding to, are we likely to see a reassessment of the G20?
I don't think you'll see a reassessment from the countries themselves, those 20 major countries. They like the photo ops. They like to be in the limelight. They like to appear to be terribly concerned and having meetings. It's pretty costless. It's a break from their normal activity. But look, the bottom line is this. The G20 started in 1999. They had 8 years to get coordinated so we wouldn't have a global economic collapse of the sort we had in 2007 and 8. Then they scrambled, having failed, to create the G20 summits where the heads of state, not just the finance ministers, would meet, as they have 8 times, with counting this one, since 2008. But they haven't been able to prevent this from being the worst economic global downturn since the 1930s. So this is not a record of success. And I think that's the problem.
All right, Richard. Well, thank you, as always. Colorful, and we appreciate your comments. Appreciate it.